In this episode of QTips, we'll discuss reimbursement payments. Stay tuned. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, click the notification bell so you don't miss any of these REPACK related tips. As you can see, we are in our new studio build in progress, so bear with us. We're just trying to up our production game for you folks. Okay, reimbursement payments. So when an invoice is approved by the FCC for payment, they're going to send you an email with the subject line, financial ops has sent your payment request to the U.S. Treasury. Now, this email triggers the U.S. Treasury to send the payment to you, right, to your bank account. It's usually within the same day, next day, you'll see it in the bank account. Now, the breakdown of the email is important to note here because it's going to have a few different pieces of information that you can use to track the payments on the back end. So it's going to have all the details of the invoice, right? We've already learned up until this point, if you've been watching our videos and you've been paying attention to the reimbursement process and just REPACK in general, you'll know that the reimbursements payments are made by invoice, right? FCC is processing invoices as they come in, and so that's how the payments are made. So this email that you'll get with that subject line is going to show all the details related to that one invoice. Now, there's going to have a few different things on there. Invoice number, vendor name, a bunch of other information. Then it's going to have total invoice amount and line item totals. Now, sometimes these two numbers are the same and sometimes they're different. An example of when they would be the same is if you'd have an invoice for PM hours, right? Our invoices to our clients are PM hours. The total invoice amount is the total amount that you're going to reimburse for. Our service is 100% reimbursable. It's all going to be paid to you. We invoice you $500. FCC is going to pay you $500. An example of when it wouldn't be, when those numbers wouldn't line up, is if you have like upgrades. So a good example of this is an elliptical antenna where the elliptical portion is not an upgrade. So you'd have 12,000 for the horizontal, then you have the elliptical for maybe 3,000, and so the total invoice amount is 15,000, but the line item total, which is the total amount of all the components or line items that are approved for reimbursement by the FCC. That number is going to be, in that example, would be 12,000. So the 3,000 would be, non-reimbursable, right? So this is important to keep in mind when you're planning your project, right? So, for example, we recently had a client who had an invoice for an antenna and a line, both on the same invoice. So one invoice number, two line items, and there's a total amount. So the antenna is justifiable, it's reimbursable, it's approved to go forward. However, the line got questioned in this scenario. So then the station had a decision to make at that point, which is, do you chase down the justification for the transmission line while holding up, knowing that you're going to hold up the reimbursement for the antenna, which is already reimbursable, or do you concede that whatever you're getting questioned on, in that case the transmission line, is an upgrade and you would pay out of pocket in order to get your antenna line paid quicker? Now, that's a decision that every station will have to make on their own. However, we advise all of our clients that they should never, and you should never, concede an upgrade simply in the interest of time, just because you need cash flow, immediately. There are multiple reasons for that. Obviously, the main reason is the FCC it's their purpose for being, right? They ask the question. If you back off, they have essentially saved money, right? Keep that in mind when you're making those requests and you're trying to decide between chasing down a reimbursement or conceding an upgrade. Again, we don't recommend conceding, but feel free to make that decision on your own. But that's important to know in terms of time frame and reimbursement payments, that the antenna payment will technically be held up until you figure out the line reimbursability. So while you're figuring that out, and that could be as simple as, hey, this is the story, here's what it is, and oh, sure, next day, no problem. They're both approved and paid within a couple days. But the way things are going now, it does hold it up a little bit. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to time things out. An easy example is an invoice with an elliptical antenna, where the elliptical portion is being considered an upgrade. So let's say your total invoice amount with the elliptical is $15,000, but it's $12,000 for the horizontal, $3,000 for the elliptical portion, which brings you up to $15,000. So the total invoice amount is $15,000, but the total, or the line item total, which is going to be the total amount that all the components that are reimbursable add up to, right? It's the sum of all the reimbursable line items on that one invoice. So in that case, your reimbursable line items are the horizontal portion. Assuming in that example, if the elliptical is an upgrade, then the horizontal only is the reimbursable. So that's an example of where they would be different, right? The 12,000 is the line item total. The 15,000 is the total invoice amount. But the rest of the email is going to give further details about that line item, such as the line item that it corresponds to on the 399 and where it comes from, and the amount. CORS, C-O-R-E-S, if you're unfamiliar, you should be familiar, obviously, but CORS, the Commission Registration System, is where you are going to track the payments. Now, if you've hired somebody like us, this is what we do for our clients all the time. You should be tracking it, if not yourself or your attorney, whoever you've hired. They should be tracking the FCC payments, because again, just like anything else, there's a human error involved, and it's just one of those things that you want to cover all your bases before the end of the project, before you enter the closeout phase of the project, just to make sure that all the money is accounted for and they have not overpaid you or underpaid you. We've seen both cases. So in CORS, you will see the individual line items as they are shown on the invoice as well. So the payments are going to show up as line items in CORS, but they do pay by invoice at the time of the invoice. An example to illustrate how that works is if you have an invoice it's for an antenna and a line. Let's say the invoice is approved for both the antenna and the line. You get the email within a day or two. It shows up in CORS and in your bank account. So in CORS, it's going to show two line items, one for the antenna, one amount for the antenna, one amount for the line, and they show up at the same time, right? And that's how it always is. It's by invoice, because the FCC reviews by invoice. So we already covered that. So this is something to keep in mind when you're planning your project, is the timing of the payments and how they're being processed. For example, we had a client recently who had an invoice for an antenna and a line, and the antenna was fine, but the line was questioned. So when the line is questioned, or when it was questioned, this station in particular, our client had to make a decision, right? Do we spend cycles chasing down the reimbursement or the reimbursability, right? The justification for the reimbursement, and argue that with the FCC? Or do they concede that the line is an upgrade in order to get the antenna payment faster, right? Because the reimbursement for the antenna at that point had been approved, and we were just waiting for the whole of the invoice to be reviewed. All of the line items on the invoice needed to be approved or rejected in order for the payments to go through. And so the decision had to be made. And really, that's up to the station. Our advice to all of our clients is don't concede on anything for multiple reasons. One, the cost was incurred and is justifiable, or if the justification exists, it's worth the while. Obviously, that we're talking about money. It's worth the cycles to dig up that justification in order to submit it. Now, if it's definitely an upgrade, that's a little bit different, right? But we never advise conceding that something is an upgrade, especially if you're fairly positive that it shouldn't be, simply in the interest of time. Another reason, is that the FCC is justifiable in making the request. The question, right? Request for more information. The RFI email that you'll get for that is now justified, right? They've asked you the question, you've backed down, so now it's, it gives them a reason to exist. So just keep that in mind when you're planning that out. That time is a factor. However, we advise that you review your reimbursability of each one of the line items that you've requested or invoices that you've submitted before you submit them. That way, when you do get that question, you can immediately respond, and that way it should not hold up any further invoices or payments. The importance of keeping track of payments in the core system is something that we advocate a lot. Either you doing it yourself or whoever you've hired. We do it for our clients. Is we go in, now you can't modify anything, you can't transfer any money in or out, but it's just to keep track of the payments, because again, like we've said, we've seen overpayments, we've seen underpayments, and it's something that you need to keep track of. So when you enter the closeout phase, or if you do get audited in 5-10 years, you're able to answer some questions. We do have, that ties into another video that we made on closeouts and audits. Just if you haven't seen that, go check that out, because that's good information of what to expect towards the end of the project. If you don't know by now, here at Q Communications, we do your engineering, design, project management, and installation for full power and low power TV stations. If you're part of the REPACK, then our services are 100% reimbursable. You can check us out on our website at repack.tv, or follow us on LinkedIn or here on YouTube. Until next time, be safe, be hygienic, and be reimbursed.